Hello and welcome to ECOTIMES.TV magazine podcast. Today we've got Stephen O'Donnell. He's an expert in terms of kind of renewables on a mass scale. So I'm the host, Alex Strong. So, Stephen, could you just tell the audience a bit about kind of your background and what kind of stuff you've implemented on a mass scale in terms of renewable energy?
Okay, so I'm an IT guy, and I've been in the IT business for over 35 years, which is kind of unusual because most people haven't even got 10 years experience in IT, but I've been doing it for such a long time. And I've been involved from the days when people like IBM said there was a market for a dozen computers in the world to where we are today, where without computing, pretty much everything that we use minute by minute would just stop. We wouldn't be able to navigate our cars. You wouldn't be able to speak to your mother or order dinner. And there would be nothing delivered to any of the stores in the world. So IT is so integrated. And as a result, it's an incredible scale. I don't know if people are aware just how big some of the data centers are around the world and how many data centers there are. People tell me that maybe the energy consumption of the IT industry is about 2% of all of the energy that's consumed in the world. So it's absolutely gargantuan. And one of the really good things about this is that the energy is consumed in very condensed areas. So we have these big data centers full of computers, and they're in one place. And as a result, we can actually focus our efforts on making them efficient, rather than having them scattered all over the place, which is much more difficult to manage.
Yeah.
And part of my life for at least the last 2 decades has been working out how we reduce the amount of energy that we use in keeping these computers going. And had some degree of success with that. And I think I might talk about some of the things that we've done. So basically, what is a data center? It's a great big factory of data, if you like. It's a huge building, sometimes thousands of square meters or tens of thousands of square feet in size, and it's full of row after row after row of computers and storage and networking equipment, and they all run 24/7 because we're a 24/7 world, and this stuff is running all the time, and it's consuming electricity. And a typical data center might consume 5 to 10 megawatts. Now, a megawatt is 1,000,000 watts. Or if you remember the old days where you used to have electric heating, perhaps, about 1,000 electric heaters, or about 200 full-size ovens that you might cook your dinner in, given that each of those is about 5 kilowatts each. So pretty powerful. And you can imagine then that these data centers produce vast amounts of heat.
Yeah.
And for much of the year, the climate in the UK and across most of Europe is such that the temperature in the data center can be regulated by using air from outside.
Okay.
So they're quite efficient. But in the old days, we used to take a really stupid approach to this, and we used to run air conditioning even in the winter. So I swear, it's just dumb.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. So for every kilowatt of energy that was consumed by a computer, in some data centers, we'd have 1.5 kilowatts consumed by air conditioning. Okay, so pick yourself up off the floor after hearing that one, because I did. And
that's stupid.
It is. It's just insane.
Yeah.
And when you consider the cost of electricity, it's not just ecologically insane, it's also commercially insane. So over the years, what's happened is that we've got more and more efficient, and we end up with an average efficiency of the data center where the amount of electricity that we use for cooling is, over the whole year, on average, somewhere between zero point 0.2 and zero point 0.3 of the electricity that we use to power the computer. So it's a vast, vast difference. And there's all sorts of things that we've done to take out inefficiencies, including switching the air conditioning off, except at times when it's really needed, using the air from outside, and all sorts of other smart technology. And I've been involved in my career in working on something called liquid cooling. Now, any of you out there who are gamers, who play computer games, probably aware of the idea that you can get these high-power game workstations where the motherboard is immersed in a liquid. Are you familiar with that?
I've come across it like on YouTube and seen some powerful PCs running that kind of system, and I saw it on a big crypto mining currency thing in China. They had a big liquid cooling setup going on. So
okay. So if you think about this crypto mining, what's that? That's just high performance computing. They want to get as many possible machine cycles out of the minimum amount of cost to build these cryptocurrencies. Well, pretty much the same applies in these huge data centers. And we're now looking at fully immersing the motherboards, the computers, into liquid, because it's 3 orders of magnitude, over 1,000 times more efficient than using air for cooling. And because if we...
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It is, because there's so much less pumping energy required to pump the liquid than there is to pump the air. And when I say pump air, I mean fans. Okay, to blow air using fans, and pump is obviously different. So all of our air conditioning technology, I call it, it's been designed for wetware. Now, we're wetware. That is that we've got blood flowing through our veins and we breathe. And if we tried to cool us by immersing us fully in liquid, it really wouldn't work. But computers don't breathe. And it's much more efficient to fully immerse them in a liquid to cool them. And there's a move to do that. Now, the other thing is that data centers have to be on all the time. Because, if you do your Google search or you make your phone call, or as we're doing right now, we make a Skype call. If the computers decide that they don't want to work for a couple of minutes, then it really doesn't fit the way that we live. So we have to have extreme reliability. And as a result, computers and data centers are connected to uninterruptible power supplies. The acronym for that is a UPS. And in the old days, these were rooms full of lead-acid batteries, not too dissimilar from the things that you find inside trucks and cars. Okay, so lead plates and hydrochloric acid and terminals, and they're all wired together, and they get charged up off the grid. And if the grid switches off, the charge in the battery basically keeps the computers going for a while. That's not very friendly. It's not very ecological, because you've got vicious acids and you've got lead, and these things need to be changed out every 2 or 3 years, same as your car battery does. And they get recycled, of course, but nevertheless, it costs energy to make them. It costs money to make them. What people are doing now is they're beginning to use flywheels. Now, if you remember, way back in the days of the Industrial Revolution, you might have seen big pumping engines with huge metal flywheels, gargantuan things, the size of a skyscraper just about, going round and round and round. And there was a thing that was pushing up and down, and the flywheel was turning round. Why was that? It was to even out the pumping from the very primitive steam engine into something that was smooth, that you could then transfer into machines, milling machines and lathes and sewing machines and weaving machines and all sorts of things like that.
Right.
Exactly the same thing happens in the data center, but we've got smarter, because the maths for the amount of energy that you can store in a flywheel is proportional to the weight of the flywheel, but more importantly, to how fast the flywheel is turning. And so what we do nowadays is, rather than having one of these great big, Stevenson-style flywheels, we've got a very small, compact flywheel, and we hold it in a vacuum. Because if you're in a vacuum, there's no air resistance, and it can spin faster.
Right.
And not just that, rather than putting it on metal bearings, like a standard flywheel, which are like ball bearings, it goes on magnetic bearings, which are utterly frictionless. So these things, once you start them spinning, it's the devil's own job to stop them spinning, because there's no resistance to the spin. There's no air to slow it down, and there's no bearings to put friction in the way. So,
how do you keep it in a vacuum, Steve?
Well, basically, you just put it in a case, and you'd withdraw the air. And here's the thing, actually. We're using them in data centers. They're relatively expensive right now. But if you look at some of the cars that are coming out now, particularly at the top end of the market and in Formula One and Formula E, I don't know if any of you guys...
Yeah.
Formula E, the electric racing series. These guys use something called regenerative braking. So when the driver pushes the brake down, it doesn't just burn all the kinetic energy off in heat in the brake shoes or brake pads. It actually turns a flywheel, which then stores the energy, and when they want to accelerate into the next corner, they can draw the power back off the flywheel again.
Wow.
Okay, so that is the next thing, and what we're going to see, even I think in consumer cars, particularly hybrid-style vehicles, we're going to see engines cutting out as you're driving along, and you will be able to draw power from the flywheel. Or when you're going downhill, that you're actually putting power into the flywheel, or when you're braking, you're putting power into the flywheel. So rather than wasting all that energy in your brake shoes, you're able to reuse it and then use it for moving your vehicle forward. Same thing in data centers. Flywheels can keep the data center going for a fairly short period of time until the data center's engines can kick in. So what are engines? They're big diesel plants. They're the size of a small cottage, if you like.
Wow. yeah, I've seen them. Like you would have say off a grid, kind of a big industrial, big diesel gen. Yeah,
that's right. So it's a gen set or generator set. They're made by people like Volvo and so on, and you'll find them very similar engines inside ships. So huge container ships, whatever. So these things are generating vast amounts of power, but they don't run all the time. They only run in the case of failure. So the battery backup, the UPS or the flywheels keep the computers going whilst the engines start, and then the engines start and the data center keeps going. So in some ways, that's also becoming a bit inefficient. Why would we want to have to store all that diesel and burn all that diesel to power a data center? Isn't there a better way? So what's happening now, and looking at replacing this and actually helping data centers come off the grid, is that very often data center operators are building their own power stations right next to the data center. And in some cases, they're using gas turbine technology. So natural gas is a bit cleaner than oil, still produces carbon dioxide and carbonates the atmosphere. But having the power station next to the data center is highly efficient because you can use something called CHP, combined heat and power. Okay? And you think, why would a data center want heat? Because isn't it cooling the data center wants? Well, there's a technology called absorption chillers. And if ever you've been camping, be in a caravan or whatever, and you have a fridge, what you'll find is that your fridge doesn't run off electricity. It runs off the gas cylinder. And there's a little flame in the back of the fridge, and it uses absorption cooling. So it heats up the coils, and that actually cools the refrigerator. Exactly the same thing happens with combined heat and power. The heat from the power station actually drives the coolers inside the data center, and you end up with 60% efficiency for the energy that you've used rather than 30%, which is what you get from a standard power station.
This sounds amazing, Steve. It seems that this flywheel technology is the way forward. I would like to thank our sponsor this week, which is ECOTIMES magazine. They cover everything green. Magazine is on the iPad and iPhone. They cover eco travel, amazing eco travel resorts, organic recipes, so amazing recipes to cook, eco gadgets, what's the latest gadgets in eco, amazing eco transport, so battery powered bikes, hybrid cars, battery powered cars, renewable energy, what's the latest in renewable energy in terms of all the different innovative ways we can get energy. Eco how-to, so for example, how to build your own solar panel or own house or something along those lines. They cover eco architecture, so like eco building. They cover tiny houses, which are amazing small houses on wheels, which you should definitely check out if you haven't seen them. They cover all eco news, so what's been going on in the week, and organic food growing techniques. Anything green really, and it's a weekly magazine, and it's on the iPad and iPhone or iTunes. So the link is below, so please enjoy. And now we get back to the show. Thank you very much. What about in a kind of domestic dwelling in terms of, you've got your solar powers or wind? Can we use this application with that, or is there a better method?
Well, okay. So thinking about flywheels. Flywheels, they're there for short periods when you don't have any energy, or you want to not use your normal energy, your grid energy. So if, for example, you combined it with solar, you wouldn't expect the flywheel to keep running all night. It might run for a few minutes, but it wouldn't run for a few hours, unless you had a massive flywheel, in which case you've got a lot of expense. So typically, if you want to be able to produce electricity when the wind's blowing or the sun's shining, you need some other form of energy storage. And that's another piece of technology I could talk to you about some of the grid scale energy storage that's coming onto the market. So right now, most rechargeable batteries use a technology called lithium ion. Lithium is very expensive. It's a rare earth metal, and we're running out of it. There's a lot of it, but we use so much of it, and we're not very good at recycling it, because we throw away our cell phones, we throw away our laptops into landfill, and they're full of lithium. That's really an expensive material that ought to be recycled. Yeah.
So sorry, just to ask you. We interviewed Bill from American Vanadium, and he's integrating vanadium flow batteries in a mass kind of grid scale setup. If you could continue what you're saying about kind of energy storage, would be great.
Sure. So vanadium is also a rare earth. That is, there's not a huge amount of it. But the problem with lead acid is it's very low density, and that is that you've got to have vast amounts of it in order to get enough charge stored. So the density of lithium ion and vanadium are much higher. The technology that's being worked on right now is something called lead antimony. So lead is a very common metal. It's toxic, but then again, so is lithium and vanadium. It's much more common. There's lots of it around. We've been producing it for centuries. We have it on our roofs. We have it in our car batteries. We used to use it for piping in homes before people realized it was killing our children. So lead antimony batteries are being produced at very low cost, and they're being put into things the size of oil drums, the kind of oil drums that you see on the backs of trucks, those then are put inside shipping containers and piled on top of each other. You put it up against your solar farm or your wind farm, and the renewable charges the batteries so that when the sun stops flowing, or shining rather, you can continue to produce power. Because there's a big problem with renewables. I love renewables, but the biggest problem with renewables is that the grid has to be able to produce electricity at all times reliably, and enough electricity to meet all the demand.
Yeah.
And renewables, not all of them, but most of them, tend to be intermittent, that you cannot predict exactly when they're going to be able to produce electricity, and there will be periods of the day or periods of the week when they won't produce any electricity at all. And in terms of, we call them service levels. In terms of service levels, the electricity company wants a service level from a generator that says, you produce electricity when I want it produced, and don't produce it when I don't want it produced, because the demand for electricity from the grid varies depending on the time of day. So if you're an electricity consumer, if you're smart, you'll be using off-peak electricity. So between about 1 o'clock and 8 o'clock in the morning, you can buy your electricity in the UK for about 7p, which I think is about 11 cents US style, whilst on-peak electricity is 23p, which I think is pretty close to 35 to 40 cents US style. So there's a big difference between off-peak and on-peak electricity. And the reason for that is that the demand at peak times is more than double. In many cases, it's 3 times what the demand is at off-peak. So the electricity companies have 2 kinds of generators. Generators that produce baseload, and that tends to be nuclear and coal, because it's harder to switch them off. And the on-peak tends to be gas turbine. They're less efficient than the on-peak ones, the baseload ones. And if the electricity company could time travel all of the demand or time travel all of the supply from peak into non-peak, then they wouldn't need so much capacity that's inefficient, and the cost of electricity would drop, and the amount of carbon that we produce in the atmosphere would drop too. So the problem with solar is that you can't predict it. And if you want to be able to deliver solar-generated electricity when it's cloudy, when there's no sun.
Yes.
And by combining renewables with storage, you've got nirvana. You've got the pixie dust. You've actually enabled an intermittent technology to produce reliable and regular charge to the grid.
Yeah.
Same applies in data centers. So if you can put these lead antimony batteries, grid scale energy storage next to a data center, then you can provide 24/7 power into your data center without producing any carbon. And that is absolutely fantastic. And it's an absolute certainty as this technology evolves that all of the large-scale data center guys will do exactly that. Capitalism will drive them to do it, because it will be the only sensible way to operate a data center and do it efficiently. And I think that's great. That's absolutely smashing, because what we could find is that perhaps as much as 2% of the energy demand for the whole planet could move to renewables if we can really solve this energy storage problem.
So in terms of these specific type of batteries, out of the other options out there, from your understanding of the technology, Steve, you think this is the best way forward?
It's the best that I've seen. Basically, these things, if lithium ion is inflammable. There was a rumor going around that the Malaysian Airlines plane that went down in the South Atlantic had 2.5 tons of lithium ion batteries on board. in cargo, and
Really?
that might have been one of the reasons that they
Went down.
They went down. Yeah, the people on board were dead because of the toxic fumes, and the autopilot just took it there.
Right.
So they're really quite dangerous. And secondly, they developed something called memory, charged memory,
Yep.
and you have to throw them away after a while because the memory rises up and eventually they don't hold charge at all. So using technology that doesn't have this battery memory problem, so
Yep.
you can use them for 50 years. That sounds great to me. Using really common materials like lead to produce them rather than rare earths, that's good because you can produce them in scale without depleting the world's resources. And we've got a ton of lead that we can recycle as well. And the fact that they're very high energy density and they're self-sustaining, it really makes sense. If you can use them over 50 years, also, the economics are great because let's say they cost £1,000 to create a small one. If you can use it over 50 years, that's £20 a year, which is nothing. If it only lasts for 3 years, then it's £300 a year, and that's very expensive. So you can use banking and other technology, other processes to really drop the annualized cost of running these things,
Right.
because they last so much longer. So I think that's the way forward, certainly for industrial scale stuff. We're going to see things like aluminium plants, which use vast amounts of electricity.
Right.
So aluminium plants use vast amounts of electricity. They tend to be located close to hydroelectric power plants or areas where electricity is very cheap. We could build these plants in places where there's lots of sun, provided we've got energy storage, and they could run with zero carbon footprint, zero cost. So the world could really change if we solve this storage problem.
I was looking into kind of big companies that are doing different things, and two companies spring to mind. One was BMW in terms of making it i3, and I believe a factory is totally powered by kind of wind and solar, and the other is Google with their data centers. So I'm just wondering whether you could, if you know anything about what other big companies are doing. Yeah.
Okay. So Google have been doing some smart stuff. I do know a lot about that.
Cool.
They've been leading the charge on using free air, using air from outside to cool the data centers. They've been putting big heat sinks onto their motherboards so that they can disperse heat faster and blowing air over them.
Yeah.
They've also been building the data centers close to the sea and close to rivers, in the same way as power plants do that. Nuclear power plants are always built next to the ocean because they can use the sea for cooling. Data centers being built close to the ocean because they can use the sea for cooling. Mind you, that's not a terribly ecological thing to do. You end up with this microclimate. And you end up having evolution kicking in, and plants and animals from the tropics appearing off the icy coast of Britain. I'm not joking either. So much better is actually doing a bit of planning and building your data center next to a market garden, where you're going to produce tomatoes and cucumbers and lettuce in the depths of winter without having to fly the damn things halfway around the world.
Yeah. So how would they, from a data center, kind of use that energy in some sort of kind of polytunnel, big kind of greenhouse setup?
That's right, because the data center can produce warm water. And what do market gardens need for producing this vast amount of food? Well, warm water. So that these guys can run in the midst of winter and have warm soil and warm air so that we can naturally produce vegetables and fruits that we might otherwise have to fly halfway around the world and become much more sustainable.
Sorry, Steve. Would that energy be clean in terms of, kind of air, or is that kind of filtered? So I'm just thinking, the air of your computer. I mean, I know it's air, but it could have some sort of like toxic chemical from like the motherboard and all the plastic and technology, and then pumping that into the veggie garden might be a bit dodgy unless it was filtered.
Okay, I understand. That's a very valid point. So there's a whole load of regulatory bodies that determine what goes inside your computers. And okay, occasionally they get it wrong, but not very often. So the air that comes out of your computers is actually very clean. It's much cleaner than the air that might come out of an office block, because it's full of viruses, germs, and dead skin. If you think about it, not very pleasant, but true. And what would typically happen is that we'd use something called a heat exchanger to take the heat from the air and put it into liquid. So there's a barrier, if you like, between the data center and the hot water. There's no possibility of any cross-contamination, and that water would then flow into the market garden and deliver the temperature, deliver the heat that's required. Yeah. And if you've got renewables with grid-scale energy storage, so you've got wind or solar, or water power or something of the sort, and you're storing it, then the whole thing is completely closed cycle, sustainable. There's no carbon in it at all. We're using what the sun gave us today and using it in the evening.
Yeah, makes sense. What's it called? I don't want to keep you too long, Steve. So if you could kind of give a nice conclusion on kind of mass energy storage for the listeners, of the technology you've seen, and just kind of, it just sounds amazing in terms of this flywheel technology and this kind of Formula One. Exactly what you said. You can see this filtering down into your hybrids and everything.
Yeah.
So
what happens in a modern economy is that once we start producing something at consumer scale, then the costs come tumbling down, because we can drive repeatability, we can use all kinds of modern technology to make things efficiently. And we've seen the costs of laptops and computers and tablets and smartphones and all of this consumer technology drop like a rock, because we're making hundreds of millions of them. Right now, flywheel technology and grid-scale energy storage are specialist. We're making a few hundred or a few thousand of these things. When we start making hundreds of millions of them, then they stop becoming expensive and they become very inexpensive. We've got so many smart engineers, production engineers, and other technologists around the world who can just drive the costs out of this stuff. And I would think that we will see flywheel technology, out of the age of Stevenson and so on, actually coming back and being part of the 21st century as a way of delivering short bursts of energy for our vehicles and maybe for our washing machines and all sorts of things. Why would we throw away energy and turn it into heat when we don't want it to be turned into heat? We really need to be more miserly. We need to be more careful with the world's resources, both because we don't want to be spending the money on it, obviously, because that's, there's an economic driver for that, but also, why would we want to waste the resources for our children or our grandchildren? And so I think the keys are, we've got some really great photovoltaic solar happening now, driven a lot by government intervention, by subsidies and so on. So we're starting to see this stuff being produced in vast amounts. We've seen people using it for producing hydrogen, which is quite interesting, although somewhat dangerous. Hydrogen is excruciatingly explosive.
Right.
But for industrial scale production, then, I'm sure we can solve it. Maybe not for home, maybe not yet. But then photovoltaic with energy storage means that we can come off the grid completely. And for places like where I live in a farm in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a field. Coming off the grid would be really efficient. It would mean that we wouldn't have to run power cables into my property. It would mean that we can build industry where industry is best suited rather than where we've got electrical distribution to it. We can make sustainable micro economies that can live off energy that's been produced locally rather than having to ship it. So there's a whole series of different ways that we can live and we can change the planet, be more efficient by fixing storage and joining it up with this much more efficient, sustainable generation that we've got. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's really enlightened myself and our listeners, and I can't wait to have you back on the show with kind of see what advances have been made and stuff in the renewable energy sector.
Okay.
So thank you again, Steve, and I wish you all the best, and we look forward to having you back on the show.
You bet, Alex. Thanks ever so. Very enjoyable. Bye-bye now.
Thank you very much for enjoying our Eco Times magazine podcast. We'd like to tell you all the platforms we're on. So we're on SoundCloud, we're on Stitcher, which is for Android. If you've got Android phone, you can download a Stitcher, which is a podcast app, and get the Eco Times podcast on there. We're on iTunes, so you can get it on your iPhone and iPad and all your Apple devices. And we're on TuneIn as well. And we're on YouTube. So please subscribe to whichever platform works best for you. And thank you very much for listening. We want to say a big thank you very much to Eco Times magazine for sponsoring the podcast. They are a weekly magazine, cover everything green. So if you're interested in growing your own food, renewable energy, amazing eco resorts, eco gadgets, basically anything green, how to build your own home, tiny houses, eco transport, organic food, anything green really. Big thank you to them. And please check them out. The links be below, and it's on the Apple newsstand, so you'll be able to get it on your iPad and iPhone. Thank you and have a great day.